there everybody, this is SXE Blues, and if you watched my previous video, you know that this is going to be a prelude to Series 6 of Doctor Who. And what I'm going to be doing in this particular podcast is looking at some of my favorite or most notable or memorable big and small moments in Doctor Who history, dealing with all 11 of the Doctors. So if you care to join me, let's hop into our own little TARDIS and go all the way back to 1963 for the first moment, encapsulating the very beginning of the series, and most memorable to me as far as the first actor, William Hartnell, his debut as the Doctor in An Unearthly Child. When first we meet him, somewhat inquisitively as the soon-to-be companions Ian and Barbara are, we meet this ornery, irascible old man who claims to be something more than he appears at first to be. And when they go inside the TARDIS and he is sort of unnerved by their pushing themselves upon him, he sees fit to unwittingly make them, passengers on a voyage through time and space that he can little control, but he would rather that than leave them behind with knowledge of his existence. And this speaks volumes of perhaps what happened before that. The Doctor's on the run. He's he doesn't want to be found. He wants at that time kind of silent, quiet life, and so that always begs the question to me, being that this is a memorable moment in Doctor Who history, what is he running from? And of course we'll later find that out, which I'll get to a little bit down the line. But the second most notable thing, or thing that stands out to me with William Hartnell, comes from the serial Dalek Invasion of Earth. And this is the speech toward the end of the piece that he gives. He sort of forces a decision upon his granddaughter Susan, who he has seen blossom into a young woman, and his life has been fraught with running and going on these adventures, and this is something that he's seen her grow, and he doesn't want her to have to be a part of. She's begun showing interest in one of the rebels they meet in dealing with the Daleks in a not too distant future Earth, and he can see, although it doesn't seem apparent until the very end, but he's apparently been observing her interaction when they're all together, and realizes that this, going into a more romantic, more adult life, she might be ready for it that time. So he gives this little speech after locking her out of the TARDIS, and it's very touching, very moving, very cool, and they even pay homage to that in the very beginning of the Five Doctors, where they show that clip. So go check that out. That's really cool. My third Hartnell memory comes from the serial The Romans, and in this, I don't remember the specifics because it's been a while since I watched it, but the most notable way I can describe this is the Doctor throws down. And what I mean by this is, up to this point, anytime they get into any kind of trouble, meet bad guys, whatever you want to say, usually Ian Chesterton or one of the other male leads is the one who gets into the thick of the fighting and the thick of the battles, and the physical requirements of getting back to the TARDIS or getting out of whatever kind of trouble it is. In the Romans, though, is probably the first time we actually see the Doctor holding his own in dealing with one or two guards. I don't remember exactly, but it was I had to go back and watch it 2 or 3 times because of my sheer delight in seeing that. So moving on to the fourth and last thing that comes to mind for me with William Hartnell's Doctor comes from The Time Meddler, and this is the debut story of one of the Doctor's own, though it's not referenced as being a Time Lord, fellow Time Lord, but one of the Doctor's species, known as the Monk or the Meddling Monk, As one last sort of, hey, thanks for all the trouble you've been causing, the Doctor shrinks the TARDIS console room of the monk. They eventually find that he has his own TARDIS, and to ensure that he won't be off causing more trouble in history, they make it impossible for him to get back into his TARDIS. And it's just really funny when he sticks his head through the little portal, and there's this little mock-up of the TARDIS console room, and his obvious being really peeved about that. So that's another cool moment. Moving on now to the second Doctor, as portrayed by Patrick Troughton. The first thing that always comes to my mind that I remember fondly comes from Tomb of the Cybermen. And there's this moment where I guess, because I haven't seen any previous stories to that one, but companion Victoria, I assume at that point, is still relatively new. And she's speaking about, losing her family or brothers or whatever it is. And the Doctor sits down by her, and he begins to talk a little bit about his losses and how he deals with their memory. And as someone who personally has experienced many familial losses so early in life, this is a very touching and moving sentiment that Patrick Troughton really brings across well as the second Doctor, and very, very memorable to me. Moving on from there to the second most notable is it comes from The Mind Robber, and it's the battle of wits and mental superiority he has with the villain of the piece, whose name escapes me. But he's got this sort of like thing on his head, this helmet, and conjuring visions that get a little outlandish to battle visions created by the villain. And it's cool, it's quirky, it's funny, and the entire sort of surreal world that it takes place in and of itself is interesting. So that's pretty cool. Moving on to the third most notable thing that comes to mind with Patrick Troughton's second Doctor, comes from The Invasion. And it's a very small moment, but there's a point where I don't remember how many episodes into it is. Maybe the end of the first, maybe in the second somewhere. There's a moment where some plainclothes unit officers have the Doctor cornered, and he just sort of resigns himself to the fact that he's not getting out of this. So he plops down on the curb, pulls out a deck of cards, and offers it up to them, sort of sheepishly with a big grin on his face. And just one of those moments that, for me, encapsulates the charm that Patrick Troughton had as the second Doctor. The final thing with the second Doctor that I'd like to mention comes from the War Games, which pretty much is Patrick Troughton's final go as the Doctor. And in it, the most notable thing to me is his sense of urgency and not wanting to deal with his fellow Time Lords. I think by that time they actually reference them as Time Lords. But he really does not want to stick around, and he tries to get away, only to fail, and unfortunately is chosen for punishment by his fellow people for, basically roving around time and space. And that marks his departure from the series. So what I'm going to do is jump right ahead to the very first appearance of Jon Pertwee's third Doctor in Spearhead from Space. Now, for me, it's very notable. Sometimes with these Doctors, the regeneration is one of those notable things. And we don't get to see that with Troughton going into Pertwee. But what we do see, the very first shot of Jon Pertwee as the third Doctor, he falls out of the TARDIS unconscious. And that always sticks out to me, that this sort of dramatic shot, where has he been? What has he been through? What did the Time Lords do to him? And of course, if you have any interest in Doctor Who and Doctor Who history and fandom, the Whovian fandom, there's a whole, missing season idea of adventures that he might have had and who he might have had them with, and so on and so forth. That takes place in that span. Moving on to the second most notable thing for me is from the serial Inferno. And this was the first Jon Pertwee serial I ever saw. And so it was a little offsetting the first time I watched it, because it involves kind of Star Trek-esque mirror universe, alternate Earth. But his smooth nature in dealing with these familiar yet unfamiliar faces, as well as the urgency with which he deals with them because of the impending plot line of the story ramping up, is just very memorable to me and very cool. Pertwee, all the Doctors in their own way win as far as I'm concerned with being really cool Doctors. I could never really pick, who would be the best out of all of them. I think they all have their great qualities, and this is one of those moments that Pertwee really rises to the challenge. I also briefly want to mention the third most notable being 3 Doctors, and there's not much to say on that. It's 3 Doctors walking around. You have, unfortunately, an ailing William Hartnell who couldn't really participate in the story fully. They had to pre-record his speeches and so forth. But you have a lot of interaction between second and third Doctors, Troughton and Pertwee, and it's just really a fun, idea. I can't remember if it's Omega that is the chief bad guy in that or not at the moment. Again, it's been a while since I watched, but it's just really fun. Finally, Pertwee's last thing that I'm going to mention here comes from the Time Warrior. And I believe this marks the very first time the Sontarans appear in Doctor Who history. And the most memorable thing from this comes when one of the bad night guys, I can't remember the names, they catch the Doctor, or the Doctor has to go into hiding, whatever it is, and he puts on the armor of this warrior robot that the Sontaran created for these nights. And basically has to kind of mimic like he's a robot and, hope that he doesn't get his head chopped off, that kind of thing. And it's just a really weird, quirky moment, But moving on to the 4th Doctor, as portrayed by Tom Baker. He was the Doctor for probably the longest out of everybody who's ever played the Doctor. I'm not sure if that's still absolutely true currently with how long David Tennant was around, but the first thing I want to speak about regarding Tom Baker comes from his debut story, Robot. And this is a brief scene where as they have to get going, the Brigadier is telling him, come on, we got to get going, and the Doctor has to get into a wardrobe, an outfit, and his impromptu wardrobe changes are just outlandish and ridiculous until finally he nails the one on the head that would be his staple with the scarf and the hat and everything. And it's just fun, deranged, great moment. The second thing I want to mention with the 4th Doctor comes from Genesis of the Daleks, which there's this, I'm sure it's been mentioned in a lot of places, people who have fond memories of Doctor Who, or dramatic memories of Doctor Who. But this moment that comes in Genesis where they've lined the place with explosives or something to that effect, and the Doctor shows his uncertainty for being the executioner of this evil race of Daleks. And, sort of prodded on by Sarah Jane and Harry, I believe. But he's really not sure if he wants to take that action. He's been enlisted by his fellow Time Lords unwittingly to do this, and he really carries the weight of that, making that decision to become, basically create the genocide of a species, no matter how bad that species is. This is not something he decides easily.